Hi, we're back. This is part 5, I believe. It's been a good couple of days. We did get the heads back. Heads just came back from the shop today, and they did a great job on those. It looks like they were able to replace that one bad valve and all the valve seats and valve seals, so I think we're good on the heads. And then also we got a part shipment in today, and so we're starting to move forward with assembly. I want to cover the piston assembly. First, remember this, the 4.7 HO has got floating wrist pins. The 4.7, stock 4.7 is the same era, has got press-in pins. So we've got it kind of easy, and we've taken off this piston off of this rod. It's very easy to do. Just take the pins out. Even though it's not a press-in pin, it's a floating pin, it will be a bit stubborn, so we were using a socket and extension combination just to tap them out. And then, of course, we cleaned up the rod really good to keep the foreign material down, and now we're starting to reassemble. So reassembly is pretty simple. Just begin by installing one of the wrist pin clips into the piston. Be really sure on both sides that this wrist pin clip gets fully seated in that groove. If you have a wrist pin floating around in that motor, you're not going to have much of a motor for long. So be sure that gets in there. Also, assembly lube. We love assembly lube. These pins are slightly oiled, mostly more than anything to keep them from rusting, I think. But we're adding a little assembly lube to that as well, just to make sure that when this thing fires up before the oil gets circulating good, that we've got adequate lubrication to keep from damaging metal parts. So a little bit of assembly lube on the pin, just that much easier to go in, and hopefully keeps it going that much longer until the oil gets flowing. So then we just put the rod and the piston in combination, and got to put this thing. Thank you, my helper. We'll cover that in just a second. You've got to be sure that you get these things in the right direction. They are directional. There's a front and a back to both the piston and the rod. And if you get them backwards, you will have trouble. So we're going to put in the other wrist pin clip. And then again, as I said, we're going to make doubly sure that this thing is buried up in that groove just as well as it can be, so that we don't stand any reasonable chance of having it come out. Wipe off a little of the excess assembly lube and check out our job. Now let's talk about forward and backward. Riley saved me on that one on this piston. This is our third piston so far out of 8. But look, each piston has a mark. For these pistons, you'll see an F located here. For the old pistons, there's also an F there, but there's also an F on the face pointing. This also has a notch on the forward side. Now the ring itself has got a notch here, which is the forward side of the ring. So be sure that you keep these things matched, front to front to front. In our case, we also went ahead and put the number on here. We're going to go ahead and reassemble them the way they came apart. Don't know that it's wouldn't be a train wreck if we didn't, but why not? So this is piston number 3. So we've done 7, 5, and 3, and now we're going to move on and do the rest. So we'll check back with you later. Thank you. Well, we're back again. Just to catch you up a little bit. I know in the earlier conversation I said that the block was ready. When they rehoned the block, they of course oiled the bores, the cylinders, to make sure that no rust happened between the time they got done and the time I got done. So that had collected a lot of dust and debris over time. So I went ahead and I washed them out real well with brake clean and wiped them down. And basically the block is as good as she's going to get until it's time to prime it. Took care of some of the localized rust, little pockets here and there. So I think we're ready to go. I think we covered the installation of the pistons onto the rods, and now we're going to talk a little bit about the rings, installing the rings and checking the rings out. One of the things that you really need to be cautious of is making sure that your ring gap is right. Again, in my case, this is a stock rebuild, so stock rings on stock bores should be fine. But it's always a good idea to check and make sure that your parts are compatible with your rebuild. So we'll talk a little bit about checking the ring gaps. If you can see right here, I've installed a ring just into the bore of the cylinder. This happens to be the number 1 ring, which is the ring nearest the end of the piston. This is the number 2 ring, and then you can barely see it, but there's a ring right here, which is one of the 2 oil rings. And each one of them, these 2 rings actually have the same clearance allowance. This ring has a separate clearance allowance. So how do you check that? Well, if you just stick it in the bore and kind of straighten it up by hand, you're very much at the end of the cylinder and you don't necessarily get the best measurement. So what you do is I took one of our new pistons that we put on our rods, and I stuck an old oil ring off the old pistons that I cleaned up really well. And sorry, a little technical difficulty. So I'm going to use this piston now to basically push the ring down into the bore and keep it nice and straight. So I'm going to do that for these 2, or all 3 of these actually. And you just let it push the ring down, and the ring should be nice and square to the piston, excuse me, to the cylinder, and then very easy to make a measurement. So set that right there. So if I come back now, I know that I'm looking at my spec sheet. This spec sheet happens to be for the HO. Be sure if you're using the HO that you use the HO spec sheet. Otherwise, just use the 4.7 spec sheet. Here you'll see you'll see ring gaps. There we go. Top compression ring, second compression ring, and then your oil control rings. And this says steel rails. We'll talk a little bit more about the oil compression or the oil control rings, but they're a bit unique. So anyway, here are the specs: 37 millimeter, 0.37 millimeters to 0.63 millimeters for the compression rings, and then what is that? 0.25 millimeters to 0.76 millimeters for the oil control steel rails. So I'm going to just show you quickly. First, we can't see worth a darn, can we? There we go. I've opened up my feeler gauge to, or my gauge to basically the maximum and the minimum allowance. And so, assuming the minimum allowance won't go in, or goes in rather, and the maximum allowance won't go in, then we're good. You can see the minimum allowance goes in, and the maximum allowance will not go into the hole. So that tells me that we're good. Just for fun, I'll check the second one here. I've already checked them all anyway. That one will not go, and this one does go. So that tells me that we're within the specifications. Now this particular ring I'm not going to show you on camera. The reason is that this ring is very flimsy, and you pretty much have to hold it in order to really gap it out. So there you go. In my view, just my opinion, and maybe it's a thing of laziness, I'm not going to check every ring. I'm going to assume that the manufacturer gets it right once. They got it right every time. In this case, see anything abnormal or seemingly abnormal, I'll deal with it. So anyway, that's how you check the ring clearances. There's also a ring side clearance when you actually put it in the piston to make sure